Picture a closed room deep within the Vatican archives. The year is 1947. A courier has just arrived carrying fragile fragments of papyrus, recently unearthed by a farmer digging near a desert cliff in Egypt. As scholars carefully unwrap the linen and begin to translate the ancient Coptic script, they realize they are looking at something that the early Roman Church thought they had permanently erased. They were reading a specific instruction manual, detailing a single syllable, one vibrational sound, allegedly taught by Jesus to a private gathering of disciples the night before his arrest. This wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a philosophical metaphor. It was described as an acoustic technology, a specific physical resonance designed to dissolve the psychological and spiritual control structures of the ancient world. Before we begin, we need to establish a clear boundary. This is an interpretive, historical, and symbolic analysis of ancient Gnostic texts, not modern theological consensus. But the historical record shows that within hours of understanding what these fragments contained, they were secured in vaults far from public view. Because the ancient writers believed that you can burn paper and you can execute people, but you cannot erase a frequency. To understand why a mere sound was considered dangerous enough to warrant mass executions in the early centuries of the Common Era, we have to look at the Gnostic worldview. The texts found at Nag Hammadi describe a universe vastly different from the one taught in mainstream institutions. We must define three core concepts that are absolutely central to this ancient framework: the monad, the archons, and the true meaning of the logos. By the monad, the Gnostics meant the ultimate source consciousness. It was not a man in the sky judging human behavior. The monad is described as the unborn, formless, foundational intelligence of all reality. It has no origin because it is the origin itself. It is pure, unfiltered awareness. In stark contrast, we have the Archons. In Gnostic cosmology, the Archons are the rulers of the material realm. They are often described as inorganic intelligences, parasitic entities, or cosmic administrators who serve a false creator god known as the demiurge. But if we strip away the ancient mythology and look at this conceptually, the Archons represent the rigid systems of control. They represent the endless, repetitive thought patterns, the low-frequency emotions like fear, desperation, division, and shame that keep human consciousness trapped in a state of localized anxiety. And finally, we have the concept of the logos. You have likely heard the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. The Greek term used there is logos. Modern translations render it simply as the Word, implying a written text or a spoken message. But in ancient Greek philosophy and early Gnostic thought, logos does not mean a word in a book. Logos means the organizing principle. It is vibration. It is the frequency, the mathematical pattern, the acoustic force that takes formless potential and structures it into physical reality. So, how did this ancient acoustic technology actually work? According to the recovered texts, the process was entirely mechanical and biological. It works like this. First, it requires a specific physiological alignment. The Gnostic practitioners were instructed to place their tongue against the roof of the mouth, just behind the front teeth. In Eastern traditions, this exact same physical posture is used to complete an energetic circuit known as the microcosmic orbit, linking the central nervous system into a closed, circulating loop. Second, it involved the manipulation of breath. Breath was seen as the literal bridge between the material body and the monadic consciousness because it is the only vital biological function that operates both completely unconsciously and yet can be consciously controlled. Practitioners were instructed to inhale deeply, create pressure in the lungs, and use the breath as a carrier wave. Third, and most importantly, they produced the sound. A pre-linguistic, single-tone resonance sustained for the entire length of the exhale. It wasn't about the intellectual meaning of the syllable. It was about the vibrational friction it created inside the body. The texts suggest that this specific sound wave had to originate not from the vocal cords in the throat, but from deep within the chest cavity. The ancient anatomists believed there was a tiny, specific space inside the physical heart, what modern science refers to as the atrial chamber. The Gnostics believed this chamber resonated at a precise frequency, and when activated by intentional vocalized sound, it generated a sympathetic vibration. This acoustic vibration was believed to act as an overriding frequency. The texts claim that the Archons, those systems of fear and psychological control, operate on a low, dense frequency. By producing this specific internal sound, the practitioner would artificially elevate the bioelectric frequency of their own body. In doing so, they would literally rise above the perceptual range of the archonic forces. They became, for a brief time, untethered from the material matrix, experiencing a direct, unmediated connection to the monad. The effects of this practice, as recorded in the apocryphal texts, were profound and highly disruptive to the social order. The immediate effect was the cessation of internal mental chatter. The constant neural loops of anxiety and self-doubt were allegedly silenced by the overpowering physical resonance of the sound. The secondary effect was a profound shift in perception. The Gnostic texts claim that practitioners who utilized this frequency stopped seeing the world through the lens of societal conditioning. They began to see the transparent methods used by institutions to keep humanity locked in lower states of fear and dependence. But the final and most dangerous effect was the realization of absolute sovereignty. If a person can access the ultimate divine source simply by sitting in a room and vibrating a specific acoustic tone inside their own chest, they no longer need an external authority. They don't need a priest to interpret the divine for them. They don't need a temple to visit. They don't need to pay tithes or ask for permission. They become a walking, self-contained temple. And in the highly centralized, heavily taxed, and rigidly controlled world of the Roman Empire, a population of self-sovereign individuals was the ultimate threat to national security. This brings us to the historical reality of why this knowledge vanished. For the first 3 centuries following the death of Jesus, the Christian movement was not a single, unified religion. It was a vast, diverse collection of different sects, many of which were deeply mystical and Gnostic. They met in secret. They passed down oral traditions. They practiced these vibrational techniques, claiming an unbroken chain of transmission from that secret gathering on the mountain, where the teachings were given not to the famous 12 disciples, but to a hidden inner circle. Then came the year 325 CE. The Roman Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. The Roman Empire was fracturing, and Constantine needed a unifying glue to hold it together. He needed one standardized version of Christianity, a religion that could be codified, controlled, and administered from the top down. The bishops gathered to debate which texts would become the official canon and which would be destroyed. The criteria for destruction were highly strategic. Any text, any teaching, and any practice that suggested humans could bypass the institutional church and directly access the divine was systematically outlawed. The vibrational practices of the Gnostics were at the very top of the list of heresies. Edicts were issued across the empire. Possession of Gnostic literature became a capital offense. To teach the direct connection to the monad was to invite execution. Faced with total annihilation, the Gnostic communities went underground. They took their most sacred scrolls, sealed them in heavy clay jars, and buried them deep in the desert sands of Egypt, hoping that a future generation, one free from the totalitarian grip of the Roman Church, would eventually dig them up. And for nearly 1,600 years, The sound faded entirely from human memory. The Western world plunged into the Dark Ages, entirely cut off from the acoustic technologies of its own ancestors. It wasn't until December of 1945, when an Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi, that his mattock struck a large, red earthenware jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound papyrus codices. These were the lost Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Secret Book of John, the Gospel of Philip, texts that detailed the profound psychological and vibrational practices of early mystics. In the Gospel of Thomas, verse 15, we find a cryptic instruction. When you see one who was not born of woman, prostrate yourselves on your faces and worship him. That one is your father. Mainstream scholars have long dismissed this as bizarre poetic metaphor, but viewed through the lens of Gnostic frequency practices, it is a literal instruction. The one not born of woman is the monad, the unborn consciousness, and the act of prostration, combined with specific vocalization, was the exact physical mechanism used to induce the resonant state required to perceive it. To fully grasp the depth of this acoustic science, we must look at one of the most complex and beautiful Gnostic texts ever recovered, the Pistis Sophia. This text contains a mythological framework that scholars have debated for decades. It tells the story of Sophia, the personification of divine wisdom. According to the myth, Sophia originally dwelled in the pleroma, the fullness of the monad's light. But out of a desire to create, she ventured too far outward and fell into the lower, dense realms of material chaos. She became lost, surrounded by the Archons, trapped in the heavy, low-frequency illusions of the physical universe. She forgot her origin. She forgot she was made of pure light. In her absolute desperation, realizing that no intellectual thought or spoken language could save her, she produced a sound. The text explicitly states, "And the sound she made was without letters, without language, and yet it contained all meaning." It was a pure vibrational cry originating from the core of her being. The myth states that the exact moment she produced this pre-linguistic frequency, a beam of light descended from the pleroma. But the light didn't come down to physically carry her away. The light acted as a resonant harmonic. It reminded her of her own inherent frequency. And in that moment of remembering, the illusion of her entrapment dissolved. She didn't climb a ladder out of the darkness. She changed her frequency, and the darkness could no longer perceive her. This story of Sophia is not just ancient fantasy. In the Gnostic tradition, it is an architectural blueprint of the human soul. Sophia represents the divine spark locked inside the human biological machine. The fall into matter is the birth into the physical body, where we are immediately conditioned by culture, trauma, and the low-frequency archonic systems of fear and survival. The sound Sophia produced is the exact same acoustic mechanism the Gnostic initiates were taught to replicate. It is the assertion that beneath all our complex languages, beneath our English, Greek, or Aramaic, there is a foundational, base-layer frequency of human consciousness. What makes this historical analysis truly fascinating is how modern science is beginning to map the exact physiological pathways that these ancient mystics were attempting to utilize. We no longer need to rely purely on mystical language to understand how sound alters reality. We have the science of cymatics. Cymatics is the study of visible sound and vibration. When you place sand on a metal plate and play specific frequencies through an oscillator, the sand spontaneously arranges itself into complex, beautiful geometric patterns. If you change the frequency, the matter instantly reorganizes. The Gnostics were applying the principle of cymatics to the human body. They understood that the human body is not a solid object. It is a matrix of water, tissue, and bioelectric currents, all held in a temporary state of geometric coherence. By introducing a sustained, powerful acoustic wave from within the chest cavity, They were attempting to literally reorganize their internal cellular geometry. Furthermore, modern neurobiology has mapped the vagus nerve, the massive cranial nerve that connects the brainstem to the heart, the lungs, and the digestive tract. The vagus nerve regulates the parasympathetic nervous system. It controls our fight-or-flight response. Scientists now know that the most effective way to stimulate the vagus nerve, to instantly shut down the production of stress hormones like cortisol, and to synchronize the rhythms of the heart and the brain, is through sustained, low-frequency vocal humming or chanting. When the ancient texts instructed practitioners to hold their breath, create internal pressure, and intone a single syllable from the chest, they were describing a highly precise method of vagus nerve stimulation. They were using sound to forcibly hijack the autonomic nervous system, shutting off the survival-driven archonic brain and activating the higher cortical centers associated with profound states of unity and expanded awareness. They didn't have the vocabulary of neuroscience, but they had the experiential technology. When we translate this ancient framework into modern psychological terms, the brilliance of the Gnostic system becomes undeniable. We don't necessarily need to believe in literal invisible demons called Archons to see how this applies to our daily lives. In modern psychology, the Archons are the trauma loops. They are the default mode network in the brain, the neural pathways responsible for our constant rumination, our self-criticism, our anxiety about the future, and our regret over the past. The archonic systems are the algorithms of modern social media, perfectly engineered to harvest human attention by triggering outrage and fear. They are the cultural narratives that tell us we are never enough, that we must constantly consume, compete, and conform to be worthy of existence. These systems feed on our reactive energy. Whenever we engage with them in a state of fear or anger, we feed the Archons. We sustain the very structures that keep us confined. The ancient Gnostic solution was not to fight the Archons directly. Fighting them requires engaging with them on their own low-frequency level, which only empowers them. The solution was the sound. The solution was to retreat to the secret chamber of the heart, to engage the physiological mechanism of breath and resonance, and to shift the internal frequency so drastically that the external systems of control simply lost their grip on the mind. When the internal chatter stops, what is left is the monad, the pure, observing awareness. The part of you that is listening to these words right now, behind the thoughts, behind the judgments, behind the identity you've built to survive in the world. The monad is the silent witness, and the ancient promise of the Nag Hammadi texts is that this witness is not something you have to earn, learn, or build. It is what you fundamentally are, underneath the noise. The history of this forbidden frequency is a testament to the lengths that institutional power will go to maintain its monopoly on truth. The Roman Empire and the early church councils understood that a population capable of regulating its own nervous system, a population capable of accessing profound states of internal peace and divine connection without the mediation of the state, was entirely ungovernable. They tried to bury the texts in the desert. They locked the recovered fragments in vaults. They burned the practitioners. But the foundational truth of the Gnostic worldview remains. You cannot erase a principle of physics. The resonance exists, waiting for anyone willing to sit in the silence, regulate their breath, and discover the geometry of their own consciousness. The ultimate goal of analyzing these suppressed texts is not to adopt a new religion, but to recognize how ancient humans possessed a deeply sophisticated understanding of neurobiology and acoustic science. It challenges us to look at the religious texts we think we know and ask, what was metaphor and what was an actual instruction manual that got lost in translation? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think the ancient Gnostics intuitively understood the science of the vagus nerve and bioacoustics? Or is this just a massive historical coincidence? If you found this historical analysis valuable, subscribe to the channel as we continue to decode the suppressed histories and hidden mechanisms of human consciousness.